we do have bad news this week. The first global tipping point for one of Earth's ecosystems has been triggered.
There's been a jump in ocean temperatures and mass bleaching and death of corals globally, affecting more than 80% of the world's corals.
And the crucial thing about these tipping points is that they're irreversible. Once they're gone, they're gone.
Scientists have been screaming, no one is listening. We've got an exclusive report on a man with paralysis who's been able to move and sense another person's hand as if it was his own, thanks to telepathic brain implant.
Amazing.
One day, this sort of development could lead to
Avatar. And there's a sumo tournament in London this week, and we're going to hear about the physiological effects of being a sumo wrestler.
15 years ago, we were still at the stage where we were like banging our heads into wooden poles to toughen up the skull. It's a ticking time bomb.
This episode is sponsored by Yakult, the gut experts for over 90 years.
Welcome to The World, the Universe and Us. I'm Dr. Penny Sarche.
And I'm Dr. Owen Hooper. Now, there's still time to get your ticket for our Festival of Science and Technology, New Scientist Live. It's being held in London on Saturday the 18th and Sunday the 19th of October.
There's also a schools day on Monday the 20th, and there's so much going on. Talks on archaeology, gravitational waves, the microbiome,
dark matter, human reproduction, climate change, loads. Plus, we're recording a podcast live from the show.
Yep, and if you can't make it to London, you can also watch it online. Search New Scientist Live to get your tickets, and if you're there, please come and say hi.
Now, this week, I'm afraid we've got to sound the climate alarm because there is some huge news about the state of the world's oceans.
Yes, we've been reporting for a couple of years now about this rapid acceleration in ocean heating that we've seen since 2023. And it now seems the rising water temperatures have pushed the world's warm water corals, which are already struggling, right to their limits. And here to tell us more about it is New Scientist environment reporter Madeline Cuff. Hi, Maddie.
Hi, guys.
Maddie, what's happened to the coral?
Yeah, I'm afraid I bring some bad news. So the major news this week is that scientists have officially declared that there's been a widespread dieback of warm water corals over the last 2 years. That, in effect, means that the first major global climate tipping point has been triggered.
And we do talk about tipping points a lot. And the odd thing about them is that these climate tipping points, as scary and monumental as they are, it's not actually clear when exactly you've triggered them, right? You don't necessarily know if you're in the middle of it right now.
Yeah, so a climate tipping point, for people who aren't aware, these moments when there's a small change in a system that makes a big difference to the overall state or fate of that system. So in climate terms, it's where we push an ecosystem like the polar ice cap, for example, or a coral reef to the limit of its survivability. And then all of a sudden, it will either die back or disappear and kind of change the way that ecosystem works completely. And the crucial thing about these tipping points is that they're irreversible. Once they're gone, and the system has shifted into a new state that can have catastrophic knock-on consequences. And yeah, Penny, as you say, it's often really difficult to spot when a climate tipping point has been triggered. Unfortunately, or fortunately, in the case of warm water corals, they're probably one of the most straightforward ones to pinpoint because warm water corals are very sensitive to even marginal changes in water temperatures. So if temperatures climb by more than a few degrees above normal, that can bleach and then essentially kill off the corals. And if that dieback happens too often or is too widespread, then the corals can't recover and they die off, and the ecosystem that they support and the marine life that they support vanishes.
Yeah, and in case people don't grasp quite how important that ecosystem is, they support up to a third of all marine biodiversity, a third, and that's just in a tiny amount of the area of the ocean. And they provide food, coastal protection, and income to millions of people living there, and protection all around the world.
Yeah, the statistics around the benefits that warm water corals provide are pretty staggering and quite difficult to get your head around. But to break it down into kind of pure economic terms, they're worth almost $10 trillion to the global economy.
Wow.
And like you say, Rowan, that's not even mentioning the fact that they act as a nursery for marine species. So they essentially prop up other ocean ecosystems. So this is a real classic tipping point where a small change, the demise of one small bit of ecosystem, can push a system, the way the world's oceans work, past a point of no return.
So how have scientists gone about declaring right now that this tipping point has now been reached?
Yeah, good question. It does get a little bit technical, so bear with me. So central academic estimates suggest that the thermal limit of warm water corals is reached when global atmospheric temperatures hit 1.2 degrees above pre-industrial levels or above, with an upper threshold of 1.5 degrees. So the long-term average temperature at the moment is about 1.3 degrees above pre-industrial levels. That's the amount of warming we've already caused. But in 2024, we obviously saw a huge surge in global temperature, and that pushed average global temperatures up to that 1.5 degree limit for the first time in human history. That's all to say that we've definitely now passed that central 1.2 degrees temperature estimate for corals, for their thermal tipping point. And last year we bumped up against the upper 1.5 degree limit. The other thing to note is that since 2023, as you mentioned, Penny, the world's corals have suffered a huge bleaching event that's impacted more than 80% of the coral ecosystem in the world. That's by far the most severe and extensive bleaching that we've seen on record ever. As Tim Lenton at the University of Exeter put it to me, we've taken a sample of the 1.5 degree world and we've seen the consequences.
So if they're saying we've passed this central estimate, we're already seeing that we're basically going to go past 1.5 degrees. It means we're going to go past the upper estimate as well.
Yeah, so at this point, unfortunately, it's virtually certain that we're going to see the widespread die-off of warm water corals around the world.
It's almost incomprehensible, really, the impacts and also just how sort of tragic that loss is. Hard to imagine ocean health or biodiversity without it. Is there anything we can do? Yeah,
we're really entering uncharted territory here. And unfortunately, at this point, there isn't that much that can be done. I mean, we can help to protect the existing corals as much as possible by reducing the other pressures that are on them, like overfishing and water pollution, for example. But that doesn't get away from the fact that the main thing that we would need to save the corals is a global concerted effort to get global temperatures back down to at least only 1.2 degrees above pre-industrial levels, and ideally lower than that. And given that it's looking pretty inevitable that we will exceed 1.5 degrees of warming, I certainly wouldn't put any money on 1.2 degrees being at all feasible in the near term, and certainly not anywhere like the time frame that we would need to save the corals.
Is there a feeling that our media in Europe, in the UK and in the US consider this a sort of global south problem, and that there hasn't been the reporting on it that there should have been? Because, you know, we understand from our work as journalists, science journalists, the real importance of corals, but do you think it's sort of out of sight, out of mind?
Yeah, is it just a tourist thing for us, you know, those of us who don't live near these amazing reefs?
Yeah, I was thinking about this. I mean, this news has been covered by some major news outlets, but there's certainly no sense that it's been kind of front page talking point in the UK and North America. And I do think that if we were talking about one of the other tipping points that was closer to home, so for example, a collapse in ocean circulation in the North Atlantic, then that really would kind of dominate the airwaves. And I do think that there is a kind of out of sight, out of mind problem here that extends to not just the fate of the world's corals, but also to other issues around climate change. Like, I've just been pulling together a big piece on the future of solar power, and everybody I speak to says that solar energy is going to change the game and the way that we run the world in the long term. But it just doesn't seem to be a narrative that has caught hold in parts of the northern hemisphere, because we have long dark winters, and therefore solar is probably not going to be our dominant energy force in that part of the world. But for the rest of the world, it will power everything. So I do think there's a kind of blinkered view that we have that if something doesn't directly affect small parts of the northern hemisphere that are the richest in the world, then we don't really consider it in the same way. But these issues have massive global importance and will change the way everybody has to live and exist in this world.
So having now hit this first climate tipping point, you mentioned some others there. Are there other ones looming, like coming along the track, unfortunately?
Yeah, there are a few that scientists think are probably the most likely to come next. As we've said, it's really difficult to pinpoint exactly what level of warming might trigger a tipping point, and the triggering of one tipping point might hasten the arrival of another one. So we're really uncertain about the timings here. But the next ones that are coming down the track is likely the widespread dieback of the Amazon rainforest, the melting of the polar ice sheets, and the collapse of this crucial ocean current in the North Atlantic that's known as the AMOC. And those could all happen at warming levels of below 2 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels.
Another story that you reported on, Maddie, this week was the jump in carbon dioxide concentrations. It's now reached a record 423.9 parts per million. And I saw there's a conference going on in London at the moment, the Blue Earth Summit. And I saw Mike Berners-Lee there, the climate writer. And he was saying there's mounting evidence for these cascading tipping points that you're talking about. And he said the language in scientific papers is as close to screaming as you'll get in an academic journal. Scientists have been screaming for a while. No one is listening. Did you know that Yakult has an amazing amount of science behind its iconic bottle? Yakult's founder, the Japanese scientist Minoru Shirota, spent many years investigating intestinal bacteria. He selected and cultivated a unique strain of friendly bacteria, L. casei shirota, and in 1935, the first bottle of Yakult was produced. Fast forward 90 years, and Dr. Shirota's work is continued with passion by hundreds of scientists and researchers seeking future applications for this unique, friendly bacteria. For more information, visit yakult.co.uk.
Next up, we've got a slightly spooky story. Just as Halloween draws near, we've got a man with paralysis who is able to move and feel sensations through another person's hand. Amazing. So, Carissa Wong, you're here to talk to us about it. How does this work?
Yeah, it's a slightly strange but absolutely fascinating story. Researchers have, as they put it, essentially made a mind-body connection between two different individuals. And it all began in 2021 when researchers started working with a man in his 40s, Keith Thomas. He had paralysis after a diving accident that left him paralysed from the chest down. And that left his arms and hands essentially unable to move or feel any sensation. So Keith was telling me he was looking for a way to regain some of these abilities. So he agreed to have 5 sets of electrodes implanted into the part of his brain that controls the movement and sensation in his right hand. And essentially, these electrodes transmit his brain activity to a computer that then decodes that activity into signals that are sent wirelessly to electrodes that are worn on Keith's arm. And those electrodes on the arm then stimulate his muscles with electrical signals, allowing him to contract and relax those muscles and open and close his hand.
That's really interesting. But I lose track a bit because there have been a lot of studies over the years looking at things like brain implants and BCIs for paralysis. What's new about this one?
Yes, you're right. So what made this so cool was that Keith also wore 4 sensors on his fingers. And these 4 sensors transmitted the sensation of objects pressing against his hand into his brain implant, which then stimulated his brain activity so that he had a sense of touch.
Oh, so instead of just going from the brain to the arm muscles, it went the other way as well.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And this allowed Keith back then to feel objects and move his hand for the first time in years. And he was telling me, some of the most emotional sensations he got to feel again were like the fur of his pet dog and holding his sister's hand again for the first time in years. Yeah.
Wow.
It sounds really emotional and amazing. But how does this then get to this telepathic thing of feeling what someone else is feeling?
Yeah, so in this latest study, Keith has now used this same setup to control and feel sensations through other people's hands, which, it's pretty wild. So essentially, the researchers got someone who wasn't paralysed, and they got her to wear the arm electrodes and the 4 sensors on her thumb and index finger. And essentially, Keith just had to think about opening and closing his own hand, and it opened and closed her hand.
Wow. So then it must have felt to him like that was his hand.
Yes.
He gained ownership of it and she'd given it up.
Yeah, what must it have felt like for
For
her
both of
to
them.
feel that? Yeah.
What did it feel like?
Yeah, so she was she was told not to intend to move her hand at all. So she did have to completely relax and give him the control of her hand.
What if she punched herself in the face?
That's not very nice. She's let you.
Yeah, no.
Yeah, and I do know what it felt like for Keith. I spoke to him and he said it did feel quite strange to start with, but then he said you sort of get used to it. And because she was wearing those force sensors on her fingers, like he could feel her picking up objects. So that was like as if it was his own hand.
But you might think, I like this, actually. You're not having it back. But to the woman, I want this hand now.
She might have something to say about it.
She might
though.
do, but you can imagine in the future a scenario where there might be some sort of, you might pay someone to say, okay, you just give me the control of your body for the next year. I'll give you $1 million or $10 million.
Any sci-fi authors out there listening?
Yeah.
There's one for
you. Yeah, we can get onto that
we'll get onto
a bit
that
later. Yeah.
I jumped the gun there.
Yeah. So I was just going to say that in a test that Keith did, he was blindfolded and the other person picked up 3 types of balls. One was a soft foam ball, one was a denser form of that ball, and another ball was a baseball. And Keith was able to distinguish between these 3 balls with 64% accuracy based on the hardness of those objects, but he wasn't able to feel things like the texture of the surface of the balls or the curvature.
Well, early days, but that's not too bad, that amount of accuracy, is it?
Yeah, it's not terrible. It could be improved, and luckily it can be improved. So Chad Bouton, the researcher involved in this study at the Feinstein Institutes for Medical Research in New York, said this figure could be easily improved if you essentially optimize the number of force sensors that are on the second person's hand, all to those angles. And he also said it should be possible to feel the shapes of various types of objects if you put a few more electrodes in the brain and also adjust those force sensors.
And what's the stated aim in all this, but without getting into the sci-fi quite yet? Like, what is there? What do they want to do?
Why did they do it?
Yeah, it's a very good question.
Yeah.
This isn't just a wild experiment.
No.
So, also in the study, they got Keith to control the hand of another paralyzed person, so a woman who had very little movement in her fingers. And so she struggled to do things like pick up a drink and take a sip. So what they found is by getting her to wear the arm electrodes and the force sensors, Keith could use his thoughts to assist her in being able to carry out those kind of tasks, so like drinking from a can in this case. So the point of this is that you could have this kind of collaborative rehabilitation for people with spinal cord injury. Keith, with just his thoughts, was able to help her to gain some abilities. And it wasn't just while he was thinking about it. The researchers told me they found, after a few months of working together, Kathy, who was the paralysed woman, had actually had nearly double the muscle strength in her arm, the grip strength, compared to before she was working with Keith. So there are real improvements.
So is that a better way of doing it than the kind of traditional way of sort of using electrical stimulation that we might have done before this?
So no. Standard therapies that involve stimulating our muscles or like neurons can lead to similar improvements in like grip strength and things like that. But the real kind of selling point to this approach is that, as the researcher said to me, it's a much more socially enriching and engaging way for people with paralysis to work with each other. So, in standard rehabilitation, people will work with physiotherapists and things like that. But there is a real value in them working with other people who have experienced something similar. So Keith told me it actually was pretty amazing. You're helping someone by just thinking about it. And he also said there's benefit from just talking to them, like the other person. How's your weekend? And that makes you feel good about yourself, and it makes them feel good about themselves too. I also spoke to Rob Tyler, who is paralysed and a lay member of the scientific committee at this spinal cord charity called the Inspire Foundation. And he echoed sort of what Keith's experience was. He said that he really did think for some people with a spinal cord injury, this could help them to be motivated to rehabilitate themselves, which, can get a bit boring, and it's easy to kind of feel like you're not seeing much improvement. But having someone else there who's working with you can really help you to have that motivation to keep working on yourself. And he also said, after you experience a spinal cord injury, you've got to kind of find a new identity. There's things you can't do. And having someone to talk to about that who's really involved in your recovery can really help.
Yeah, it does sound really motivating and rewarding to do something together like that. And I suppose that helps overcome the ick factor, basically, of letting someone invade your body and letting them use your neural system for a while.
Yeah, you're right to say, it is a pretty invasive, to have someone sort of inhabiting your hand, and hands aren't just hands. They're really personal things that allow us to do so many different personal tasks in our lives. So it is going to be really important, as Rob told me, that you appropriately match people with paralysis so that they do share motivations and outlooks. And of course, they must feel psychologically safe and comfortable with each other if you're going to pair them to do this.
Because psychologically, if you've lost the use of your hand, just on an emotional level, however much you trust the other person, to have someone else basically being able to control it is quite a difficult thing to swallow. But I can see how with physio it can be so grueling, so demanding. Anything that sort of boosts that social connection and builds the motivation, you can see the power of it, can't you?
Yeah, it's really deep stuff, isn't it? It's really wonderful. About the sci-fi side of it, did you ask him about that? Those sort of more far out aspects of it.
Yeah, of course. It's such an intriguing idea. So I did ask Bhutan, the researcher, and he really did envision that one day this sort of development could lead to
Avatar.
Yes, people remotely interacting with each other in a way that's never been done before. Wow. People sharing sensory experiences, collaborating on tasks through these mind-body connections happening thousands of miles away. He said, this could be a whole new way for humans to connect on a new level. But of course, that does come with ethical issues. This is by no means going to be, something that happens in the next 5 years. And as Harith Akram at University College London Hospitals told me, it brings up that question, is it good or bad for society for people to be able to control and feel through other people? He said, you can imagine you could cause harm to another person through their own body or commit a crime by controlling their body and then say, it wasn't me.
Yeah, I get that. But let's end on I think this is a really positive, lovely story. And let's end on all the good that this could do. And we'll keep that other stuff in check.
Yeah, sure.
Rowan, you've been at the sumo.
I have. I love the sumo. There's a Grand Sumo Tournament here in London. It's only the second time in history, in all the ancient history of sumo, that they've held one outside of Japan. The last time was in 1991.
And was that also here in London?
At the Albert Hall, yeah. So they've brought in tons of soil and clay, and they've built a proper doyo, the circle that the wrestlers fight on, and they've built like a shrine roof over it, and they basically transformed it into this little island of Japan. It's really great. And seeing the sumo wrestlers around London and there last night, there's just something wondrous for me about seeing them. Like they're just huge, strong, and otherworldly.
I'm jealous. Every time I pop out for lunch and come back, someone tells me I've just missed them.
You should have
They've been wandering around. Yeah, this is true. All really interesting, but what's the science connection? How are you going to concoct one here?
So I have managed to concoct one. So there's no weight division in sumo like there is in boxing, right? So you can have a relatively small guy matched up. Say he's only 120 kilos, fighting a guy 60 kilos on top of that, 180 kilo.
Yeah.
And so you really have this David and Goliath type matchups. And that means there is some interesting physics. I mean, it is, there is some interesting physical, what strategy do you use to lever someone out? So that's the sort of physics side of it. Then there's a diet of sumo wrestlers as well, of course, right?
Yeah, so they must eat so much to
so much.
Yeah.
They make this famous dish called chanko nabe, which is really delicious. I only eat it in small bowls. They eat vast amounts of it. But there's also some quite worrying stuff about their longevity, actually.
Yeah, it can't be good to eat that much and maintain that large size for so long.
Yeah, exactly. So to find out more about this, I spoke with John Gunning. He's a sumo writer for the Japan Times in Tokyo, my old place. And he commentates for the sumo for Japanese TV, and he runs Inside Sport Japan. This is a media sport company, and he was an amateur sumo wrestler himself. And here he is. John, thanks for joining us. Welcome to the pod. I want to start with a bit of physics and then get into the physiology of sumo. And so for people who might not know much about it, sumo is this game for two people. One has to push the other out of a ring or make them fall over. And naturally, that means that the bigger you are, the better, right? So that's the physics.
To a certain extent, but because it's down or out, as you said, and there's balance involved, it's not just merely size, because there's also the element at the beginning of a fight where you could do that kind of ole dodge to the side. So if your momentum will carry you straight out of the ring if you're too big and you can't stop all that mass moving forward. So there's a certain sweet spot in height and weight in terms of ratio, but even in the top division, there's a wide variety of body types, heights, weights, sizes, and skill sets.
But generally, you do have to bulk up to get to that sweet spot.
Yeah, there's a certain minimum and maybe maximum as well, we'll say, in terms of height and weight, that's where most people will be within those ranges.
Yeah. Okay. Take us through a typical day at a sumo stable. Maybe a bit about the diet, and let's talk about let's get rid of this myth that they eat 10,000 calories a day.
Yeah, I don't know where the original 10,000 calories came from. I think it was a journalist before my time, but it stuck like a few other things. Because it's such a set number, you can't, it's like saying, a football player eats a certain amount of calories. It's so varied. Each person is different and depends on your height and your weight and how hungry you are on that day. What you're eating, what you're eating out. They do eat a lot more than, we'll say, the regular person. They do eat more regularly. Even though people don't seem to realize that, they think they just eat once or twice a day. But I mean, sumo wrestlers are snacking constantly, a lot of them throughout the day. They're young. They're men in their late teens to early 20s, mid 20s, that most of them. So, their energy requirements are high anyway. And they're then in this incredibly intense sporting environment that, requires like full active participation for hours every morning. So they do put in a lot of calories. But again, it depends on the person and the size and the particular day. They would eat a lot of rice, large bowls of rice. But the basic meal after training is what's known as chanko nabe. Chanko is just a sumo word that means food, and nabe is a kind of soup stew that maybe a lot of people would know about. But I mean, in terms of vitamins, minerals, macronutrients, stuff like that, it's very healthy. There's a lot of vegetables, there's a lot of lean meat, chicken, fish, stuff like that. So it's just the amount, really. It's just, they're eating healthy food. They're just eating a lot of
vast
healthy
amounts
food.
of it.
Vast amounts of it.
When I was in Japan, there was a famous foreign-born wrestler called Akebono, and he was definitely on the outlier of what you've just said. He was 6'8", so over 2 meters tall. Weighed 233 kilos. And very sadly, he died last year, aged only 54. And there have been studies showing that the wrestlers have a much lower life expectancy than the average, certainly the average in Japan, and maybe 15 years less than the average. So there is this very bad physiological effect that it has, not just on the heart, but the other injuries they pick up, right?
Yeah, Akebono, obviously, somebody I knew very well. I was very sad when Chad Rowan was his name. His last name is the same as your first name, but he, him, Musashi Maru, Konishiki, the Samoan Hawaiians, obviously genetically, we're talking about a very different body type there. They're very large individuals anyway, but you can't disagree with what you said there. The fact that sumo takes a massive toll on your body. It's not just the weight related stuff. It's, your back. Like even when I was doing sumo, 15 years ago, we were still at the stage where we're like, banging our heads into wooden poles to toughen up the skull. Like that was the mentality, the CTE and, micro traumas to the brain and the repeated impacts and the concussion, all of that. I mean, still really hasn't seeped into sumo's consciousness. So that's obviously taking a toll on people. I mean, I feel it myself. I was an amateur, but I trained with pros for 10 years and, I have, discs out of place in my back, neck, like lingering injuries. And I wasn't doing it on the level of intensity that the professionals are doing it. So Sumo takes a massive toll on your body. I was 60 kilograms when I started sumo. I went to 120, so like 9 stone to 18 stone in the course of 2 years. That was a deliberate choice. Like I was lifting every day. I was heavier and heavier objects. I was eating everything, creatine, supplements, protein powders, I didn't really need to do that because I was an amateur, as I said, but I wanted to have that. I wanted to experience it. And my heart enlarged from the stress of doing sumo and the stress on the body. And because in sumo, one of the things that differentiates that sport from others is there are no real rest periods. In between tournaments, they're going on months. So each tournament, tournaments are bi-monthly. They're in the odd numbered months, but in the even numbered months, they're going to London or they're going around Japan. So, I mean, there are no real days off, and you're going, as I said, in training at full intensity. So you had that up for a decade. You're just battering and ramming your body into massive, heavy individuals on a constant basis. And then you're putting on, in most cases, you're putting on a lot of weight, which stresses the joints, the heart, everything else. And the difference in life expectancy the gap has closed. It's not as bad as it used to be in the old days. I think the reason for that is there's a better understanding of nutrition. There's a better understanding of training and of maintenance. But still, sumo is a traditional activity. It's a vocation rather than a sport. And the reason that they do the exact same kind of training every day is not because in terms of sports science, it's the most logical thing to do. It's because it's like someone who's doing thatched houses or doing pottery or doing weaving. The way of doing it is the craft, is the tradition. And sumo's raison d'etre is to continue the traditions, continue the ways. So, I mean, doing that practice is actually doing sumo. So they have to do that. But I mean, there's a better understanding, I said, outside of that. So there's a little bit more flexibility and you can work it around the edges. And I think you see a lot more with wrestlers when they retire these days. They do drop a lot of the weight. I mean, Taka Keisho, who's a star who retired recently, maybe is an extreme example, but you wouldn't even recognize him. He looks like a regular little Japanese businessman, like he's so small now and he's so thin, and it's just like people can't believe that he was this giant, just 2 years ago.
Surely there should be a bit more from the Japan Sumo Association, a bit more care taken over the wrestlers.
There is a bit more, but it is just a bit more. I've been banging the drum on air and in print for improvements in this area for the last decade. But like a lot of things, it takes time, as I said, to seep into the consciousness of the sport. One of the difficulties that you have with sumo, in rugby, you can change the laws of the game. In American football, you can, there's continuous improvements to headgear, helmets, pads. The rules also change. Certain types of tackles and hits are not allowed anymore. In sumo, the entire basis of sumo is two large individuals crashing together, and they're doing so basically head to head. So they're not wearing any protection. They're not wearing any helmets. They're fighting on a hard surface that's 2 foot off the ground. So when they fall off the edge, there's not a lot you can do. I've proposed that they go back to the style that you used to have in the 70s, where they were very lax with that initial charge and they allowed an almost standing start. At least it removes the massive impact at the very beginning, that coconut sound that you get of the heads cracking together.
Yeah.
It doesn't remove all of the other stuff, but it's a start and it's a first step. But yeah, it's a ticking time bomb, especially for kids, because kids sumo is a big thing, and they rely on the next generations. But children's sumo, they still have the kids cracking heads, banging into each other. So it's not sort of something that is considered dangerous yet. I think when it seeps into the sumo consciousness, it's that time bomb is going to go off, because if parents don't want their kids doing sumo, then it's going to be very difficult to find wrestlers for the next generations. And it's already a sport, which struggles with recruitment.
That's all for this week. Thanks for listening to The World, the Universe and Us, and thanks to our guests.
We'll be back next week, and if you're at New Scientist Live, do come and see us. Bye for now.
Bye.
This episode was sponsored by Yakult, the gut experts for over 90 years. For more information, visit yakult.co.uk.